Hello and welcome to Feast Your Eyes. We revisit great films and look at the stories they tell with and about food.
Food. Sell.
This episode we're looking at Under the Skin. The film follows an alien disguised as a human, played by Scarlett Johansson, who drives around Glasgow picking up men in a transit van and seducing them. Once she takes them home, the men descend into an oozing black void and are then trapped, somehow processed in a nightmarish netherworld, and eventually emptied of all their flesh and bones. In the source novel by Michel Faber, this process is much more explicitly like battery farming. The men are knocked out, castrated, chemically purified, fattened up, and packed into cuts of meat to be sold as delicacies back home. In the film it's much more bizarre and alien, though the void perhaps aims to show a mechanism or process that is literally beyond our comprehension. Sexual desire is part of industrial farming, as is leading animals to slaughter. The men don't even resist or seem to notice as they sink into the ground. There is a gulf of understanding here between a person and the animals they eat. The precise mechanics of an abattoir would escape a cow, but if they didn't, the cow would surely be terrified. This alien is unlike other man-eating monsters in films. She doesn't gulp people down in a frenzy or go mad at the sight of blood. Just as most humans don't feel hungry when they look at a pig, she doesn't see men as meals, yet. There is an industrial process to turn people into food, which is part of what makes it so bizarre and, well, alienating. The alien exists in a work structure, possibly hierarchical, and leads the men home under pressure from others to do so. Mimicking a human is simply part of her job. The first time we see her, she's undressing a human woman to complete her disguise. And seeing an alien who looks like a woman, we wonder if we can see the woman as something other than human. She then picks up a fake fur coat, a nice visual gag for us humans, as from her perspective she is dressed as an animal. The entire style and structure of the film aims to present this alien view of humans, something similar to our view of animals, and the act of seeing delineates people who are food and people who are not. Watching a baby wail on a beach after being abandoned is incredibly upsetting and even shocking, and yet put at the side of the frame in the background, surrounded by a natural landscape and making non-speech sounds, can we see the baby as the alien does, perhaps like a noisy bird? Scenes of the alien simply looking at the people of Glasgow take up a good portion of the film, and she wants to be seen, but not for what she really is. She doesn't want to be recognised. Being recognised makes you vulnerable, but then vulnerability can engender empathy, and therefore is a necessary risk involved in being human. After she falls and is helped up by strangers, we get a montage of people in the street. An obsessive sense of looking takes over this scene, and the images are layered to abstraction, as if the eye is overwhelmed by information. This is a kind of revelation, such as the shattering realization that your food may have a consciousness. Soon after, a mirror triggers a change of heart. She sees herself in her food. After reconciling her thoughts with the human image in the mirror, she allows herself to be taken in by a stranger. She is carried and then undressed, echoing the woman from the beginning. Vulnerability and empathy are developing together. She takes the first steps into an unknown future and begins to understand the experiences of the animals she eats. Her attempts to live as a human initially fail when she tries to eat a slice of cake. Of course, cake is hardly a food of mere sustenance. It's a food of celebration, of decoration, indulgence. It's not about necessity, but social meanings, meanings that can perhaps only make sense to a human. Cross-species communication is repeatedly highlighted. Human speech is often obscured and unintelligible. And she barely speaks to the kind man at all. They do, however, communicate. In a strange instance of the alien being fed by her food, he cooks her dinner. He also gives her a cup of tea. Of course, in the part of the planet where she has landed, that is an enormous cultural signifier. A cup of tea is more than just a drink, it's sympathy, empathy, and an acknowledgement of shared feelings. So what sort of communication is necessary for empathy? Do we use animals' inability to speak to justify eating them, and if so, what kind of justification is that? At first, she carries out her job dispassionately from an external perspective. The labour processes that both compose and obscure the gap between animal and food deliberately kill empathy, but a shift in the relationship can create it. In the source novel, most of the alien's colleagues retain their original form. She worries that when they look at her human form, they feel what she calls the sickening opposite of recognition. the fear that she is seen not as who she is, but as the animal that she appears to be. But this fear is related to her growing empathy with humans. After all, the idea that under the skin we are all the same can be horrifying. It means that either our food is people or people are food. But ultimately, after learning about human subjectivity, she looks around at our planet and concludes that, and I quote, "Outside the twisted bones and scarred flesh of one's own body, life wasn't shit at all." Hope lives in the very notion of empathy, the idea that one's own subjective experience doesn't define the limits of what the world means. Applying this logic to humans can be frightening, but it is necessary. Doing the same to the animals that we eat is difficult for many of us, but that way surely lies hope.